In July 2022, 4 European bison were released into a 560-hectare woodland near Canterbury, England, the first of their kind to stand on British soil in 6,000 years. Most people looking at that forest would have seen exactly what it wanted them to see: tall trees, thick cover, a cathedral of ancient green. What they would not have seen, what decades of conservation management had failed to diagnose, was that the forest was dying from the inside. Not from disease, not from drought, from stillness. This is the story of how 4 animals, guided by 6,000 years of biological memory, accomplished more ecological restoration in a matter of weeks than 40 years of human intervention, with chainsaws, budgets, and management plans, had achieved across the same ground. The evidence comes from the Kent Wildlife Trust and the Wilder Project, the organizations that designed, funded, and monitored this reintroduction with baseline surveys, species counts, and a long-term monitoring program that will run through 2050. Their data does not suggest the bison helped. It suggests the forest had been waiting for them. Walk into a British ancient woodland, and the phrase itself does most of the work. Ancient. The word carries the assumption of something intact, something that has endured. The canopy is closed, the trees are tall, the ground is thick with leaf litter. Conservationists had been managing West Blean conventionally for years, coppicing sections, cutting back undergrowth, clearing invasive species, and the results were real, but temporary. Stop the work for even a single season, and the canopy sealed itself shut again. No light, no understory, no insects, no birds, a green shell, impressive from a distance, hollow at its core. Before the bison arrived, baseline surveys recorded 178 species of spider, including one not seen in Britain since 2004. A rare fungus beetle absent from UK records since 1988. Nightingales. The diversity was there, but clinging on in fragments, in the margins, waiting for a physical architecture that human hands could not sustain. Then the bison arrived, and what they did with their hooves and horns in the first weeks forced every assumption about forest management into question. To understand what the bison were walking into, you need to understand what West Blean had become, not what it looked like, what it had become. The canopy above West Blean and Thorndon Woods is, by any visual measure, impressive, dense, continuous, the kind of thing that makes a visitor stop and reach for a camera. But impressive canopies are not living ecosystems, they are ceilings, and a sealed ceiling in a woodland is a slow death warrant for everything beneath it. Without light reaching the forest floor, the flowering plants vanish first, then the shrubs, then the grasses. What remains is a uniform carpet of leaf litter, biologically inert, visually tranquil, ecologically empty. The specialist insects that require exposed soil, bare wood, and structural complexity in the understory have nowhere to go, and when the insects disappear, the food chain above them collapses in sequence. The nightingales, the lesser spotted woodpecker, the bats, gone or clinging on in the margins of a system that no longer supports them. Kent Wildlife Trust had been working this woodland for years, and they knew exactly what was happening. Coppicing opened sections, light flooded in, ground flora returned, but the results required constant, expensive, labor-intensive renewal across hundreds of hectares indefinitely. Let the schedule slip, lose the funding, lose the staff, lose a single season, and the canopy resealed itself within years. The conservation model was not failing because of bad science. It was failing because of a simple, brutal arithmetic. The woodland was bigger than the budget, and always would be. The forest needed something that doesn't take a salary or a management review. What it needed was an animal that had been doing this work, without instruction, for hundreds of thousands of years. And what that animal's history reveals, where it came from, how close it came to disappearing forever, is one of the most staggering survival stories in the natural world. Now here's what you need to understand about the animal itself, because the bison's history makes what happened in Kent even more extraordinary. By 1927, the European bison was extinct in the wild, not endangered, not critically threatened. Gone. The last wild individual was shot in the Caucasus Mountains, and with it, an animal that had roamed the forests of Europe for hundreds of thousands of years ceased to exist outside of captivity. What remained were 54 animals scattered across European zoos, a population so small, so genetically compressed, that the margin between survival and total extinction could be measured in single individuals. Of those 54, only 12 proved genetically viable for breeding. Every European bison alive today, all 7,000 of them, descends from those 12 animals. Everyone, think about that. The recovery was not accidental. It was methodical, painstaking, and documented with a precision that reflects how close the species came to the edge. The European Bison Pedigree Book, maintained continuously since 1932, tracks the lineage of every living individual, a genealogical record unprecedented in wildlife conservation. In 1952, the first reintroduction into the wild took place in Poland's Białowieża forest, the last primeval lowland forest in Europe. It worked. Slowly, then unmistakably, it worked. The bison had been pulled back from nothing, reconstructed, animal by animal, across 7 decades of coordinated international effort. So when 4 of them were loaded into transport crates and driven to a woodland in Kent in 2022, it would have been reasonable to assume the story was still one of rescue, of conservation charity, of giving a recovered species more room to exist. But the bison weren't brought to Kent to be saved, they were brought to work. And the work they did, the specific, ancient, irreplaceable behaviors they carried in their bodies, is the reason this project has forced the entire conservation establishment to reconsider what a healthy forest actually looks like. Here's what the work actually looked like, because this is where the data becomes impossible to dismiss. The matriarch began with the bark. Using her horns and the full leverage of a body weighing close to a ton, she tore long vertical strips from the nearest willow, exposing the pale cambium beneath in what rangers described as surgical gouges. To a casual observer, this looks like damage. To an ecologist, it is construction. A bark-stripped tree, left standing, becomes a snag, a dead or dying upright structure that supports, according to woodland entomology research, upward of 2,000 species of beetles, fungi, and invertebrates, structures that human conservationists, working with chainsaws and management schedules, take decades to create at meaningful scale. The matriarch produced one in an afternoon. Then came the knockdowns. A European bison at full weight does not walk around obstacles, it walks through them. Using its shoulders and the momentum of its entire mass, the bison pushed against mature trees until they fell or fractured, creating light gaps in the sealed canopy that had not existed for decades. In those gaps, dormant seeds in the soil that had been waiting, in some cases for years, for a single shaft of direct light, began to germinate within one growing season. The wallowing came third. Dropping to the ground and rolling with the full force of their bodies, the bison churned the leaf litter into shallow pits of exposed mineral soil, ecological hotspots for specialist insects that cannot complete their life cycles on a sealed, uniform forest floor. And the grazing, selective, irregular, unpredictable, created a vegetation mosaic across the woodland floor that no coppicing rotation had ever replicated, not a managed patchwork. A living, shifting, biologically responsive one. The response from the woodland was not gradual. Rangers monitoring the project documented dung beetles appearing in bison droppings so rapidly within weeks of the release that one described it as the beetles having received the memo before the bison even arrived. Fungi began colonizing the dung within days. 4 distinct behaviors, 4 distinct ecological outcomes. Each one is irreplaceable. Each one is free. If this is reshaping what you thought you knew about conservation, hit subscribe. We go deep on stories like this, the ones that challenge the official narrative with actual measurable evidence. Now, back to the data, because the numbers coming out of West Blean are even more shocking than the behaviors that produced them. But the evidence didn't stop at behavior. It accelerated into numbers, and the numbers are what make dismissal impossible. The Wilder Blean project established a monitoring program designed to run through 2050, with baseline data collected before the bison arrived and systematic surveys conducted at regular intervals thereafter. This is not an anecdote. It is longitudinal, institution-grade ecological measurement. And what that measurement is recording, just 2 years into a decades-long study, has already exceeded what project ecologists conservatively projected might take a decade to achieve. Slow worm counts, a reliable indicator of ground-level habitat quality, because slow worms require the precise mosaic of bare soil, vegetation cover, and invertebrate density that the bison's disturbance creates rose from 36 recorded individuals to 58 within 2 years of the release. Grass snake sightings, according to project monitoring data, quadrupled across the same period. These are not marginal improvements. They are the measurable signature of a food chain rebuilding itself from the ground up, triggered by 4 animals working without instruction across 560 hectares. And then, in a detail that carries more symbolic weight than any survey sheet, a calf was born. The first European bison born on English soil in 6,000 years. The forest was not just recovering. It was, by every biological measure available, becoming a place worth being born into. The project was working, visibly, verifiably, and faster than anyone with institutional authority had dared to predict in writing. But this success created a problem the authorities didn't anticipate, because a thriving wilderness and a managed public woodland are not the same thing, and the collision between those two realities forced a confrontation that the conservation establishment is still not fully prepared to have. The problem the authorities didn't anticipate was, in a sense, the oldest problem in British land management. What a thriving wilderness looks like offends us. West Blean under the bison does not look like a protected woodland anymore. It looks broken, churned, scarred, trees are down, bark is stripped, the ground is pitted and irregular. To the trained eye of an ecologist reading the monitoring data, it is the most biologically alive this forest has been in living memory. To a visitor expecting the tranquil order of a managed nature reserve, it looks like something has gone wrong. And that gap between what a living ecosystem looks like and what we have decided a healthy landscape should look like is the real story this video has been building toward. The authorities built bison bridges, fences, managed corridors to keep the public separate from the raw, ungoverned work of the animals, not because the bison were dangerous, but because the wilderness they were creating was too confrontational, too messy, too honest. Here is what the evidence assembled in this video shows when you step back far enough to see its shape. A forest that looked healthy was dying. An animal that looked destructive was healing. A management model that looked scientific was failing. And 4 bison, carrying behaviors encoded across hundreds of thousands of years of co-evolution with European woodland, walked into a 560-hectare green shell and began doing in weeks what millions of pounds and 40 years of human effort could not sustain. Slow worms, grass snakes, dung beetles, fungi, a calf born on English soil for the first time in 6 millennia, each one a data point. Together, they are an indictment. The devastating implication is this: if what we call conservation is, in practice, the management of nature into a form we find visually acceptable, then we have not been protecting the wild. We have been curating it. And curation, it turns out, is a slow, expensive, and ultimately futile substitute for the ancient biological relationships we severed when we removed these animals from the landscape in the first place. The question is no longer whether rewilding works. The evidence from West Blean makes that a settled matter. The question is what else we removed, what other ancient mechanisms, what other ecological ghosts are still absent from landscapes that are, right now, dying quietly behind a green facade we mistake for health. Turn on notifications, because the next video goes into exactly that, the next ghost species being considered for return to Britain, and what the evidence suggests its absence has already cost us. If this changes how you see conservation, share it with someone who still believes a tidy forest is a thriving one. The bison didn't know they were saving anything. They were just, finally, allowed to be what they had always been, and the forest, after 6,000 years, knew exactly what to do with them.